So we also have a interactive session with breakouts. We've got plenty of facilitation to support that. And when we get to that stage with Paul Chatterton, we will explain how that will work, and then you will break out into groups. That will all be organised for you, and then we'll be able to have an interactive session around donut economics and how that might apply in Leeds. So over to the agenda. Very busy agenda today. We're starting with an inclusive growth update from Tom and from Eve, and they will just give you a flavour of what's happening in the city at the moment and talk about some of the key points that have been arising, you know, whether it's about the COVID pandemic or whether it's about development in jobs and other inclusive growth initiatives, and also some of the investment decisions that have been taken recently that have both positive and not so positive impacts on the city. We'll then move into a discussion with a panel, and that will be moderated by Eve, and Eve will introduce the panel and take you through the purpose of that discussion. And again, we'd welcome points and questions from everyone who's participating today. We'll then have a short break, just a short comfort break for about 10 minutes at 11 o'clock before we move on to our keynote session, which is about donut economics. And we've got Kate and Leonora with us, and we'll have a session there with plenty of opportunity for questions and discussion. And then we're going to have our breakout session, which is Paul Chatterton, who's a professor at the School of Geography in Leeds. And then we'll be able to gather some of your thoughts on how that might apply in the city. So I'd like to now hand over to Tom and Eve to take us through where we are on inclusive growth. Thank you.
Thanks, Nigel. Shall I go ahead, Eve?
Yeah.
Please do, yeah.
Yeah, great. Great to see everybody. And my connection sometimes fades out for about 10-15 seconds, and so if that happens, don't worry. Hopefully it'll come straight back and you won't miss some crucial bit of insight. Probably not, if my record is anything to go by. So I just thought before Eve gives a bit more detail, I just wanted to talk a little bit about where we are as a city. I think what a 2 years we've all had, and the pandemic has hit the city extremely hard and hit families within the city who were struggling the hardest, and it's had a disproportionate effect in terms of health inequalities on certain citizens and colleagues and friends in the Black, Asian, minority ethnic community. And so I think, we shouldn't underestimate the impact that COVID has had. And I think that's one of the reasons why we wanted to have this session. We wanted to make sure that we factored that into the work that we were doing. And so the challenge of facing this next year and coming out of the pandemic, as we hope we are, it's very timely that we're talking about our best city ambition and refreshing that, and also the plans that sit behind that. The work that we're doing to collaborate with people in the city is more important than it's ever been, I think. To try and give a bit of order to the chaos that COVID has brought, we're thinking about this year as we did last year in 3 phases. So the first phase, the one that we're in, being about that period where clearly COVID, either restrictions or impacts on everyday working life and the way that we live is very very intense, and we expect that phase to be to be shorter than it was last year and less severe. And hopefully with we're coming out of the restrictions today, we know that there's a sort of tail in terms of the way that COVID plays out. So the health and care systems are under intense pressure still, and we think that will remain so, and there'll be, issues to do with absences, particularly through January and February. But we're hoping the second phase will start a bit earlier, where we move into the summer, the spring and the summer. We can get back to more of what feels like a bit more normal life. Obviously, getting used to how testing might work in that phase, making sure that we're keeping up the ability of people to get vaccinated and maximising that, but more of a normal summer maybe than we've had for the last 3 years, and then a winter period where it will become more of the norm, where we will see, perhaps a new variant, perhaps a new intensity of the Omicron variant coming back in the winter, and a dual vaccination period where we have to basically give a booster to, hopefully a single one, but it could be two, on booster and flu, to either the whole population or a large part of the population, in the case of flu. And I think, that will be the sort of life that we've got to get back used to, and hopefully that will be one that will allow us to do, virtually all the things that we did before the pandemic. And it's also not just the bad things, but learning from the good opportunities that have come out of these new ways of working. Would we have got this amount of people doing this event today? Would we have had as low a carbon impact in doing so? There are lots of things that I think we need to take from the pandemic that have been good, as well as the lessons and the particularly the tragedy of the deaths and the health inequalities that we've had. Just in terms of this year, to give you a sense of where our thinking is, we think there are three big policy challenges that maybe don't appear in documents as much. The first one is around cost of living, where everybody will know from your energy bills and where they're going to be heading, that this is going to have a massive impact on people, and particularly those families that we were talking about. It could push several thousand families into poverty in our city. It's on top of other pressures in the system as well. And it's one that we're very, very aware of in the council, and we're going to be thinking quite carefully about ourselves. The second one is around workforce. I think workforce is going to be the issue of the decade. We have worked really hard to make sure that we're an employer that people want to stay working for, that attracts good people, and that we have the people we need to do the jobs. But the labour market is probably the strangest it's ever been at the moment, with high levels of vacancies, but still pretty high unemployment relatively. And that's going to be the challenge for every employer that I've spoken to since the start of the year. The first thing they want to talk about is skills and talent. And so I think making even more of an effort, doubling down on all of that. You're going to hear from Eve about our talent plan, doing that collectively as a city, linking into the schools, the colleges, the universities, is going to be absolutely critical to us. And the link to the work you're going to hear from Kate, Leonora and Paul about, and thank you to them for what they're going to do with us today, which is a great piece of work and piece of thinking. It makes that sense of, can people actually afford to travel to work or travel to study in all the ways we're setting up the city, as an example, becomes even more critically important, not just in moral terms and social terms, but in economic terms as well. And then finally, linked to that as well is, what will the return to work be like? How will that play out? Is it going to be more of a balance between working from home and working in the office? How do you avoid, for those people who since from day one of the pandemic in our organisation have been working as they always did, and turning up for work and going out into the city, how do you make them feel as valued as the people who maybe have that flexibility to work in a slightly different way. What is the value of face-to-face versus online, and how do we make sure that we make the best of that? And very much in line with the first two issues that I mentioned, if you've got somebody who it really costs them a lot of money, they're on a relatively lower wage, but to travel to and from work, it costs them more to travel to and from work, but actually they can do their job just as productively at home. It's very hard to make that case within an organisation. However, we know that for new starters, for younger people, that for some people in mental health terms, they've really missed that interaction that they have with people at work. And we know from some of the services that we provide that we have taken a bit of a hit by not having face-to-face contact. There's also a big digital inclusion issue about all of that. So if you, and it's actually more linked to, I would say, to data than devices. In many cases, we know that some of the families that we have to support and want to support and want to give access to public services just don't have the ability to access that. And if you're having a conversation with someone where you can't see them, you can't look into their eyes, it's a bit difficult and more challenging. So cost of living, recruit workforce, and the return to work are the big issues for us for this year. The city ambition, I'll just briefly talk about that. That's going to be still very much around the three big areas that we've based our work on the last few years: inclusive growth, the one that you all know very well. We want to grow our economy, but we want to make sure people in Leeds who live in Leeds benefit from that, whoever they are, and they have an ability to achieve their potential. Second, and that's in a regional context. Secondly, the health and well-being. How do we help improve the health of the poorest the fastest? And thirdly, net zero. You're going to talk about that later as well, I'm sure. How do we get that to happen in the city in a deeper and stronger partnership? So very active partnership working, partnership for a purpose, not just coming around a big comfortable table like this and saying, of course, all of these things are important, but having accountability when I leave this conversation to know this is the thing I've got to do differently as a result of what we're talking about today. And not just thinking citywide. Citywide's really important, but also we know how big the geography of Leeds is. We know that communities, towns and villages make up that city. How do we make sure that we've got that emphasis and that ability to flex at that local community level as much as the big city level, if you like, and make ourselves a bit more accessible? Because I know in big organisations, big cities, it feels a bit impermeable at times, and we've really tried to change that, and we want to continue to change that as well. We're very disappointed about the integrated rail plan and the decisions around HS2, but we remain highly ambitious for the city, and we don't want to overdo the disappointment and make people feel that transport in Leeds is all bad. We've got positives. We've used the money that we got over the last 5 years to put lots of park and ride into the city, which is very successful. We have improvements to the train station, expansion of capacity, better access at the southern and northern entrances. We've got lots more cycle lanes in the city, segregated. We have lots to look forward to, with mass transit promised now, with real money behind it for the first time. We've got to think about the rail upgrades that we're going to still have, that we're going to benefit from, with around half an hour to Manchester, less than 2 hours from London, once we get high-speed services coming through. So no need to be cowed by what's happened. We'll still fight the fight, but actually, how do we make a real difference? Because it is so important. Inward investment, the investment levels coming into the city are huge still. If you have an opportunity to walk around the South Bank, you'll see lots and lots of cranes. The universities and the college are making major investments into the education sector. We've got a new hospital, Children's Hospital and an element of the reconfiguration of the LGI happening in the city that we've wanted for a long time. That work has started. So, there are so many things to be proud of and look forward to, but equally we have challenges as well. We want to work on the future talent, particularly, and the Anchors Network work that we've been doing is great as well. And there's lots on the green side that we've been doing that's really making a difference. That, a district heating system that is proving extremely successful, that is actually making money for the council now, and is making a difference in terms of as we chart that into the future, so that we can reinvest that money into accelerating the work we're doing on net zero even faster. We have the biggest electric fleet in the country. We don't need a clean air zone now because of the improvements that we've made with the threat of that happening. Lots and lots that we want to do, and more that we want to do as well into the future. We also want to, as Nigel has said on the chat, play that role regionally, nationally, and internationally. We've got the 2023 celebration coming up. We weren't allowed to bid for European Capital of Culture, so in a very Yorkshire way, we're going to have a celebration anyway. But that's all about legacy. It's all about those communities, about those young people who maybe don't have, that academic opportunity, but maybe have a talent in music or the arts or sport, or how do we use food to bring communities together? How do we really celebrate the fantastic cultural assets that we've got in the city, both big and small? All of that is to look forward to as well, and we want to play that regional role really, really strongly. We see, I'm not one of those people who are quibbling about little this and that and the other about the mayoral combined authority. We've wanted devolution for 10 years. We've got it. We've got a very energetic mayor in Tracy. We've got a strong partnership with the combined authority. Let's make it work. And let's make the best of it for Leeds and for the whole of West Yorkshire, and play our rightful place, take our rightful place on the national stage, where Leeds is increasingly seen as somewhere that is tackling these difficult issues very effectively. But we always want to do more, and I'll leave it there, Nigel. Hopefully that gives you the sort of input that you need, and hand over to Eve.
Thanks, Tom. So I'm just going to build a little bit on Tom's overview and give you a little bit more detail on what's happening in the economy, but then touch on the three themes that we set out in our economic recovery framework back in October 2020, which were to respond, to reset and renew, and to build resilience. So if I kick off first with a little bit about an economic overview. So if we touch on employment first, national employment growth has stalled at the moment, and that's so we're seeing falling unemployment, but that's offset by further rises in economic inactivity. That economic inactivity is driven by three things. So high worklessness, due to ill health, young people outside education, and older people actually leaving the workforce. And those are things that we need to think about really carefully as we consider what we do to address that, because we really need to encourage those people to be able to get back into work so that they can be active in our economy, both in terms of for their well-being, but also to support our employers and to support the economy more broadly. In Leeds, our universal credit claimant count is 43% higher at the moment than March 2020. And whilst that sounds high, it's actually an improving picture, because it was actually almost 90% higher than March 2020 at periods since the COVID pandemic. And in November, it was at 58%. So it is an improving picture all the time. Nigel mentions about cost of living. So we've and Tom, and we've all been aware of prices rising in the supply chain and increases in energy costs, and that's certainly something that employers have been giving us warning signs about over periods of time. There's many reasons for that. The supply chain issues around the cost of containers coming in from China, for example, the issues around energy and demand around energy, and the shift in the economy back towards a service economy. We're still actually consuming a lot more goods than we were pre-COVID, when we were more of a dominant service economy. All of that's leading to the highest inflation figure for 30 years at 5.1%, and wages are not growing in line with inflation. So that's what's causing this set of circumstances that Tom talked about, where we're really concerned about people in the city getting into really difficult circumstances, and that actually is a threat to us being able to make progress in relation to inclusive growth. So a big thing for us to think about this year and to focus on. And then finally, sort of in that sort of more detailed view of economy, it's always interesting to talk about footfall and what's happening around footfall. So in the city centre, weekday footfall continues to be around 30 to 35% lower than pre-COVID, so 2019. And that's not really surprising, because we had started to see some people returning to the workplace some days of the week pre the Plan B restrictions coming in. And then, of course, we've had another set of restrictions and advice about working from home. So we expect that footfall will gradually increase through the year. But again, as Tom said, we don't yet know how that will play out. However, weekend footfall continues to be quite strong. And also we hear from retailers that basket spend tends to be higher. So when people are in the city, they're tending to spend more. There are some instances where that's not quite the case. So, for example, kind of places like Boots, which might be quite reliant on heavy footfall of people popping to buy something at lunchtime. But for other sort of brands, actually, they've seen quite high basket spend and done okay over that Christmas period. So, and that's a bit of a kind of helicopter view on that economy piece. And then I wanted to touch on what we've been doing around responding to COVID-19. So since the start of the pandemic, we as a council have distributed over £296 million worth of grants to businesses. And of that, around 20 million of that is discretionary grants, and discretionary grants have a much bigger overhead in terms of us having to review the applications for those grants and processing them. We're really, really pleased that we were able to respond very quickly to the news back in December around the Omicron grant. We got those grants open on the 4th of January for applications. We've been processing them through as quickly as we can to support businesses. And we'll continue to do that right through to the end of March, which is the date by which we need to have made sure we've paid all of that grant money out to businesses in Leeds. Alongside doing that, we were really proactive in the last year, doing a lot of work around marketing Leeds, both in the city centre, but that we do market Leeds as a whole. And we ran a range of campaigns, including Leeds Christmas and Eat Leeds, to encourage people to come back into the city centre and to key locations right across the city. And they were actually very successful campaigns, and we worked really closely together with a range of partners to make sure that the Christmas offer was there, and actually that those experiences were really well received and have performed generally well through that period. So that's really pleasing. We've also been able to use some of the grants money that we received to provide a little extra support to Arts at Leeds grant recipients. And we delivered something called Leeds Inspired Live back in the summer, which was about encouraging grants to people that were going to put on outdoor events that people could attend, whether that was kind of music events or other things. So that's been really good. We've been able to do that and adapt and use the money that we had for grants in that way. And then finally, we were also able to, through that grant money that we had for COVID, create Innovation at Leeds, which was a scheme that we set up for organisations that rely very heavily on business sponsorship and were quite vulnerable, but really important to our innovation ecosystem. And the 12 projects funded through that, which include one-to-one and peer support programmes, mentoring, workshops, and there's also going to be a series of face-to-face conferences in March, which will cover legal tech, space, fintech and artificial intelligence. So it's going to be a great way to get people back into events and meeting together. So those are some of the things that we've been doing around Respond from an economic perspective. And then if I move on to sort of reset and renewal, there were a number of areas when we put the economic recovery framework out there where we said we need to do a bit more thinking to get a view on this. So since then, we have done a significant piece of work looking at the future of the city centre and our local centres, which is a piece of work that we took to our council exec. That is now informing a lot of the work that we're doing around enhancing the city centre, and will continue to, and local centres, and will continue to be informed as we go. A project that we've been working on for a long time pre-COVID was how we can go about measuring inclusive growth. And I'm really delighted to say that we're now at the point where we have a social progress index for Leeds. We have populated it with the data, and we will be later on this year, once we've tested out that data with some of our elected members, we'll be putting that social progress index out there for people to be able to see and to use and to come back to us on. So that's something we'll come back to in more detail, I think, at a future one of these events when that information is out there. Tom mentioned about our future talent plan. And I just want to say thank you to everybody that contributed to the consultation around that, which took place in the autumn. We had some fantastic contributions through the online kind of, we crowdsourced the feedback essentially from you and from everybody else in the city. And we were so pleased because we've got a really diverse audience responding to that. And as a consequence, I think we're going to have a very rich future talent plan, which we're writing now in response to all of your feedback. In some ways, there's no surprises in there, but it really kind of emphasised the key areas of focus and the key ways we need to think about some of these challenges ahead. Digital, unsurprisingly, is right in there as something that's got to be at the heart of our thinking, not just in terms of servicing some of our fantastic digital businesses, but also making sure that people in Leeds have the digital skills that they need to be effective in the workplace generally and to be able to thrive. But there was other really strong themes that came in there as well. So, for example, how are we going to make sure that people in Leeds can get into the jobs that are going to be emerging jobs because of the green economy? I'm sure we'll hear a bit more about some of that later on. And how can we make sure that employers and skills providers can work more effectively together? So lots of really interesting things that came through, and watch out for that future talent plan coming forwards. A piece of work that we're doing now that we just started undertaking is with the Centre for Progressive Policy, is really thinking about the green economy and thinking about how we can really understand what the opportunities are and where the kind of threats are around just transitioning to a green economy, and how we can build that into our economic policy. So that work is early days, but it's a really important piece of work to inform the refresh of the inclusive growth strategy, which runs until 2023. Finally, in terms of reset and renew, we have been making really good progress with our Leeds Anchors network. The Leeds Anchors network was subject of one of these meetings previously. If you haven't really heard about this network, it includes 13 of the largest organisations in Leeds. We're all working together to really act around improving terms and conditions for our employees, around our supply chain, and how we can look to influence our spend locally with Leeds-based suppliers and suppliers in West Yorkshire, and a whole range of areas. And you'll probably hear a little bit about that in the next discussion, because we have got Sarah from Leeds Beckett University who's been involved in some of that work. But I'm really delighted to say that we secured £440,000 from the Health Foundation last year to help us with some of the work that we'll be doing into the Inclusive Anchors, which is about how we can address health inequalities with economic development working alongside public health partners. So that piece of work continues to have significant momentum. Just keeping a quick eye on the time. So The third theme in the economic recovery framework was around building resilience, and Tom's mentioned some of the things that are in this space that we've been working on. So in the city centre, for example, the work that's gone on Cookwood Street to pedestrianise that is part of a wider set of work around greater green projects across the city centre. All the improvements along the hedgerow, the work that's going on around the Corn Exchange, but also some really significant projects that have kicked off. So if you've been down near the Tetley, you'll know that the City Park is now under construction, which is really very exciting. And also City Square, the image that's on the slides is the artist's kind of impression of what City Square may look like once we have closed it to traffic and we transform it. This is a really exciting prospect in terms of potentially having a really fabulous transformed gateway into the city that really speaks of Leeds. So lots of big projects still going on and very committed there. Of course, there are projects that are happening all over the city as well. It's not just about the city centre, but just highlighting those ones this morning. I'll just touch on a couple of other points rather than repeating Tom. So innovation is a big focus for us at the moment as well. So we have been working to refresh the vision for the innovation district in the city and moving towards talking about an innovation arc stretching from the area, the location potentially of British Library North at Temple Works, right round to the university site through the West End, which is a really exciting prospect for us. So we're working closely with partners to bring that to life, both in terms of the economic vision and the spatial plan for that part of the city. So just wrapping up, I just wanted to sort of highlight a few things coming up. So Leeds 2023, we can't mention it enough. It's going to be so exciting, and actually, you know, we probably need this even more than we did when we committed to doing this back in, 2017. I know Cully is on the meeting today. I noticed that, and Cully, please do pop something in the chat about how people can find out more and get involved, whether you're a business or whether you want to get involved in some of the projects. Today, if it's not been put out there already, we will be announcing that we're naming a bridge across the River Aire in memory of David Olawale, and we're working on another project around with Leeds 2023 around a memorial for David Olawale in the city centre park. And I mentioned this project because it is a project that is really important to show how the city reflects on and represents how we've moved forwards in terms of respecting the diversity of our city, understanding how we treated David Olawale when he came to this city. He was persecuted, and respecting that history. So that's a really exciting thing for us that we're able to do that, working with DOMA, which is the David Olawale Memorial Association. And then finally, of course, there's a lot more kind of transport projects in the pipeline too. So I'll wrap up there because I know I've gone slightly over time, but hopefully that's just added some extra meat on the bones of some of what Tom's update. So Nigel, back to you just to update us on the next agenda item, I think.
That's great, Eve, and thanks very much for you and Tom. I mean, you've really cantered through an awful lot of things that have been happening in the city, some of them not so good, but some of them really positive. And I think we should be celebrating our diversity now. And I think 2023 is going to be a great way of doing that. So thank you. I think it's over to you really, Eve, because you're going to be the moderator for the next session. We've got a panel discussion and we've got a question and answer session on the Great Jobs Agenda. And you've highlighted the importance of that, and also the importance of our talent planning. And I think that is really fantastic. So over to you.
Thank you. So Francis, Sarah, Jermaine and Councillor Pryor, do you all want to pop your video on if you've not already, so that we can see you all, and Nigel, if you want to pop off video, brilliant, thank you. So good morning everybody, it's lovely to have you. Shall we just kick off by doing some short introductions, and then I'll ask Councillor Pryor if he'll give us a bit of context before we kick in. So Jermaine, would you like to introduce yourself first?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Eve. Hello, everybody. So my name is Jermaine Benjamin. I'm the Operations Director at Transition Partners. We are an IT recruitment agency, and in relation to myself, I've been in recruitment for over 12 years now, so hopefully I can bring a slightly different dynamic to the conversation today. Thanks,
Jermaine. And Francis?
Lovely, thanks Eve. My name's Fran Jones. I'm one of the Associate Directors at the Centre for Local Economic Strategies. We're a think and do tank based in Manchester, but we've had the pleasure of working with Leeds and particularly the Anchor Network quite a lot over the last few years. So really great to be here today, and just very enthused reading your update report that was circulated ahead of time. So looking forward to getting stuck in.
Thanks, Fran. And I love the think and do tank bit. That resonates with us in Leeds. And Sarah?
Hello everyone, I'm Sarah Swales. I'm the Deputy Director of Human Resources at Leeds Beckett University. So as Eve mentioned previously, we are one of the anchor institutions in the city, and we're very committed to that activity and the work there.
Thanks, Sarah. And finally, Councillor Pryor.
Morning everyone. Yes, I'm Councillor Jonathan Pryor. I'm the Deputy Leader of the Council and also Executive Member for Economy, Culture and Education.
Thank you. Would you like to kick us off, Councillor Pryor, by telling everybody a little bit about what the Great Jobs Agenda is? Because obviously not everybody will kind of know what that means.
Of course. So we signed up to the Great Jobs Agenda originally back in 2018 it was, and it was originally it still is a TUC campaign about ensuring that people have access to good jobs, and that there are kind of 6 key parts to that. So that's about having a voice at work, it's about having fair and decent pay, guaranteed hours, fair treatment and respect, learning and progression, and having a safe and healthy workplace. And since we signed up to that originally, we updated it year on year. I think we were due an update, I think March 2020, and then the world kind of events overtook. So kind of as we were coming out of the pandemic, we were looking to refresh the Great Jobs Agenda. And actually kind of when we were looking at the jobs landscape, which had obviously changed massively, it wasn't that the priorities had changed. In many respects, it meant that those priorities were doubly important. They were so much more important than they were before, just to ensure that people have those good jobs. And it links so well into kind of the other things the council are doing at the moment. It's part of the Best City ambition, and it's part of that wider inclusive growth strategy that as the economy of Leeds grows, as our economy improves, we want to make sure that everyone benefits from that economy. We want to make sure there are better jobs in tackling low pay. So we do a huge amount of work with the anchor institutions, the 13 huge employers in the city, which I think represent 58,000 jobs. So it's about 1 in 7 jobs in the city. And it's things like paying the Living Wage Foundation real living wage. Eve mentioned before how much inflation has increased, how much the cost of living has increased. I don't know if people saw on Twitter over the past few days, there's been a lot of discussion about where inflation really is. You know, what basket of goods are we looking at to kind of see what costs people are paying. So there is a moral argument in ensuring that people have enough money to live their lives. You know, they're not choosing between heating and eating. But equally, there's an economic argument. You know, if we're putting money into the hands of people who are going to spend that money, That's going to keep our economy moving. We're going to get better productivity. People will want to live and work in Leeds. So the benefits are huge. And I'm so pleased that kind of our anchor institutions are joining us in much of this work, and really excited to increasing it further and further.
Thank you. So Sarah, that might be a quite nice lead into just hearing from yourself. Obviously, Leeds Beckett University are a really active member of the Anchors Network, and you're part of the employment group. Can you maybe tell everybody a little bit about what that group's been doing together, and particularly what you've been doing at Leeds Beckett University?
Yeah, happy to do that. So I think one of the first things that I think is worth mentioning is that the anchor work is very much embedded in our strategy. So our strategic thinking about what we do as a university, and that's three dimensions really. One is our economic contribution. So that's about our economic contribution to the city, and procurement and activity we do in relation to that. The second element is sort of the human dimension, and that's twofold. So that's the people we employ, but it's also the students who we educate, who come to the university. A large proportion of our students are from Leeds and from Yorkshire. So we are very embedded in a sense of place, and we're very committed to improving educational outcomes for students who come to the city or are already based in the city. And then the third element is about how we use our intellectual resources in terms of some of the projects and some of the ways in which we can contribute in terms of sort of thinking and moving forward across the city. So in terms of the employment activity and the employment anchor group that we're part of, one of the priorities that the group has had is publishing equality and diversity information. So looking at how we can collect information across all the anchor institutions and show a pattern in terms of employment opportunities. So we have published that information for Leeds Beckett University. We know we've got work to do in that area. So having published the information, that doesn't mean that we've got all the solutions and we're perfect in terms of the diversity of our employees, but we're happy to publish that, and we're happy to commit to improving the areas that we need to focus on. Another example of work that we've been doing is looking at procurement. So we have a very clear procurement strategy to try and increase the spend locally, so in the city and also in the Yorkshire region. And again, that's embedded in our sort of financial thinking and about how we contract when we're doing sort of major capital works or other investment, but also looking at how we work with SMEs. So it's not just about big contracts, it's about how we work across the city in lots of different ways. And then another example that I'll just sort of mention initially is also how we can work with our students and provide opportunities in the city for our students to help. So health inequalities has been mentioned a couple of times already in this discussion. And an example of that is some of our speech and language students helping in terms of providing speech therapy, reducing waiting lists, and looking at how we can work in sort of targeted projects as well. So that's a little bit of a flavour of the type of work that we've been doing. I hope that helps.
Yeah. No, that's great, Sarah. Thank you. I should have said at the beginning of this section, I want to hear from all of you about questions you want me to put to this panel. So please do use the chat to put any questions in there that you want me to put to the panel. And I'll just continue. We'll continue to get the conversation started, and I will then bring in your questions as you pop them in there. So Fran, you obviously work on a kind of a national level, not just looking at cities. So in terms of kind of the great jobs agenda and some of these issues we're kind of facing about good work, fair pay, good terms and conditions, why are these things important, when you look at it from that national level? And having listened to both Councillor Pryor and to Sarah, what would your reflections be on that?
Brilliant, thanks, Eve. And I mean, I think the first thing to say is that the work that you've been doing together in Leeds, particularly through the Anchor network over years now, it's just really important to recognise the strong foundations that gives you, because hearing somebody, hearing Sarah there talk about how embedded this thinking is into the way that Leeds Beckett operate and its business operations is a huge stride from where a lot of organisations are, I think, and that really a recognition that anchor institutions are a huge part of this landscape as you address these big challenges. That 1 in 7 jobs in the city figure that you talked about, Councillor Pryor, the heft of that is absolutely enormous. And I think there's 2 things for me about that in terms of this agenda. One is that the kind of mindset shift that goes on in an institution which has its core business of educating students, as you do at Leeds Beckett, or treating people in the hospital, whatever it is, but that also recognizing that your economic influence is a public good in itself and can be mobilized for the good of the city of Leeds or and the wider region, is an enormous shift, because then you start saying, well, actually it's in our mission as an organisation to mobilise that, to connect those jobs to the people in the city who perhaps haven't traditionally had access to them in the same ways. And then thinking about the spending power, really interesting to hear you talking about that, Sarah, because in the direct employment, you have an ability to connect people to jobs right now in the sort of immediate term. But in the procurement, you've got the ability to start to reshape the economy. And I think that's, it's big, lofty ambition stuff, but this isn't just about spending some more with some local businesses in Leeds. It's about saying, how can we think about the supply chains that we have across our anchors as a way of stimulating a different kind of economy for the city of Leeds? And I'll just give a bit of an example about that. I think in some ways, a lot has changed through COVID and a lot has stayed the same, because we look at the figures around people who earn below the living wage across the country, and it plays out in Leeds as well, doesn't it? We've got about a fifth of people earning below the real living wage, and that means that they have been struggling for ages, and then cost of living tips people over into crisis, doesn't it? Or furlough tips people over into crisis. And so you're sort of revealing this quite large chunk of the economy that is not providing the basic things that any good economy should. People being able to live well on the money that they earn. And that, I think, it's getting at that bit of the economy through supply chain work, really thinking about how can we grow the sorts of locally rooted ethical businesses and influence those existing businesses in the city to really adapt their practices and their operations so that they are generating those kinds of jobs in the future, and whether that's in existing sectors or in ones that we know are going to grow, like in the green economy. So I think there's the immediate work of connecting those employment opportunities to people in the city, and then there's this big piece about using the influence of anchors through their supply chains to start to reshape the economy and transition to something that gets at those long-term issues about an economy that doesn't necessarily work for everyone.
Thanks, Fran. There's a couple of questions coming through now on the chat, which are great. So I'll come to them in a moment, but I just want to bring Jermaine in for his perspective, really, from the private sector side. So we're doing some early work around how we can take some of the approaches that we've been working with through the Anchors network into the private sector. Jermaine, what do you at Transition Partners do in terms of thinking about your approach to kind of supporting social mobility and supporting good work?
That's a really good question. I think that the big thing for us, and probably in a wider context, is really leading from the front, and really leading from the front from a socially responsible perspective. And I think we're making some real big strides in that area as businesses. But I think there is still an element and a long way to go, as a lot of the time, social responsibility is not necessarily a tick box, but it's another thing to do as businesses. So I think from a wider context, we've got to move towards more of a values-driven, socially responsible organisations, or it being a main driver for our businesses, and there's lots of reasons for that. But then bringing it to down to our level in terms of what we're doing. Whenever we set our annual targets and budgeting, we look at our charitable links and contributions. I mean, the biggest thing that we're doing this year that we're really proud about is our Leeds Digital Charity Ball. So the driver behind that is, as has been mentioned already, is to try to work to remove digital exclusion. So we're working with Leeds Community Foundation, and all our proceeds will go to them to distribute that effectively in the community. And I think another thing that we're looking to do, or we are doing, but we're reevaluating, is our values. You know, really looking at how we can lead our business through our values. And it's spoken about a lot, D&I values, how they do translate into the bottom line. And I think that's where the private sector, and in particular, leaders in those private sectors really need to step up and do more to drive their businesses through the socially responsible lens, if I could say that.
No, that's brilliant, Jermaine. So I'm going to sort of come back to you in a moment, just to around that kind of diversification of the workforce. So hold that thought, but I'm just going to take a couple of the questions from the chat first, because there was a couple in there around the same sort of area, which is, you know, how are we doing really in terms of kind of both through our own supply chains supporting third sector, but also what's the real position around the real living wage across the city. So I don't know, Councillor Pryor, if you want to come back in and maybe give a view about where you think the city is on the real living wage, but also on the comments around how are we using some of our supply chains to kind of support third sector and work that through.
I don't have the figures in front of me for comparatives with other cities, but I know in terms of real living wage as a council, Leeds is far ahead of others in the country. So Leeds has got the largest in-house workforce of any council in the UK. We've got far less work that's been outsourced to others. When we've had conversations with the Living Wage Foundation, it was an issue where for some organisations to become a living wage employer was actually just increasing the wages of a small number of people, because they outsourced a lot of work in Leeds, because we have kind of in-house catering in our schools, we have in-house a cleaning service. I think it's just over, we've obviously had quite a staff reduction since the start of austerity and actually COVID as well, but we've still got over 14,000 employees at the council. So actually for us to become a living wage employer was quite a significant step. So I'll look up in the chat where that question came from and see if we can find some figures on comparators with other cities. But I certainly know for us as a council, that commitment was a commitment to far more people.
Yeah, thank you. I think the other thing to bear in mind is that Living Wage Foundation, you do have to pay to sign up to that. So, and not all employers that pay the real living wage are signed up to the Living Wage Foundation. So it's not necessarily a complete picture of the performance of the city. The team may have some numbers around that. If they do, I'm sure they'll put them in the chat. Just to feed back on some of the other questions. So Jack, thanks for your suggestion around campaign on local spending. Obviously, we did something together around Buy Leeds back at Christmas time in 2020. I hope that that's a direction of travel we're going with some of the work that we'll do with the private sector. I suppose the emphasis has been with the large anchor institutions because of their sway and their impact. And we now want to bring large private sector institutions in that and think about how that then works through into the supply chain. And in 2022, that will be a big focus for the Anchors Network. We'll be doing some of that. Sarah, do you want at all to talk a little bit about what you've been doing through the supply chain, just in response to some of the questions in a little bit more detail? I know in Beckett, for example, you've been providing some business support to some of the businesses in your supply chain.
Yes, and we do that through the business school. So where we try to provide support to SMEs and other businesses through the academic staff and the students we have through the business school. So yes, that's definitely part of what we do. I mean, some of the work that we do with the supply chain, I've noticed the comments about how do we weave commitment to the living wage through the procurement supply chain, and that's work in progress for us. So that's something that we're starting to look at in a bit more detail in terms of that level of influence. But certainly in terms of our reach, in terms of the type of organisation, so looking at how we change our discretionary spending, looking at targeted work with suppliers. I mean, we know that we've increased our spend with SMEs. We know we've increased our spend in some of the most disadvantaged neighbourhoods in Leeds as well. So not just targeting it in those areas that are more affluent, but looking at where we can spend it in more disadvantaged neighbourhoods. And the focus of the support through the business school is about trying to support their businesses in the supply chain itself. So sort of supporting their resilience in the supply chain, I guess, is how I would describe it.
Thanks, Sarah. So I'm going to change the subject now onto one of the questions that was asked in the chat, which is about diversifying our workforce and making sure we have a diverse workforce. So two pieces of work just to mention before I get this conversation going. So first of all, the Anchors Network have done a great piece of work with Open Innovations, formerly ODI Leeds, to develop a diversity dashboard. And I'm going to challenge the team now to put the link in the chat. And we as employers have put our data in there, which maps our diversity against the city. So the city's demographic versus the organisation. So I will tell you now as a council that we have an issue. We don't have enough young people in the council, a lot of people that are over 55, so 45 to 55 age group. So there's an interesting observation there. We do have quite a good representation of the city's kind of ethnicities, but not necessarily in the higher grades in our organisation. So some interesting things from a council perspective. So that's one piece of work to mention. The second piece of work I want to mention is that we were supporters of a piece of work that we did in partnership with the digital sector recently around racial diversity in tech. That's really important because that's the fastest growing sector in our city at the moment, and hence actually inviting Jermaine because he works from recruitment in that area. So I'm really interested to hear from all of you about this, but I'm going to go to Jermaine first about how can we make sure that as employers we work to diversify our workforce, and what do you see employers doing that you're working with that are trying to do that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a real passionate area of mine, and I've been working in and around D&I or ED&I for well over 5 years now. Unfortunately, I haven't got that long, but I'll give you a few top level thoughts. I think, Eve, what you mentioned there about the data is absolutely critical. I think organisations really need to be looking at the data and mapping that to their organisation, but also against their demographic. But also, it's a little bit more than that in the sense of what does the data tell us, and analysing that further. For example, as you mentioned, Eve, what in terms of, yes, we may have a 50-50 split in terms of gender, but actually, what level is that gender split at? How many people do we have at board level from a gender split perspective? How many people do we have in our leadership programme from a gender split perspective, or BAME perspective, or accessibility perspective? So it's really looking at those numbers and delving deeper. I think there's also a real big cultural element that needs improvement from a leadership perspective, and really educating around unconscious bias, really embedding D&I into the fabric and the priorities for leaders, and how they build their teams. some of the things we've worked with some of our clients in the private sector, and of course have done internally, is, you know, implementing a 12-month D&I program across the business and looking at some of the priority areas that needs further attention, whether that's BAME, accessibility, and actually having advocates or champions or senior stakeholders almost owning those pillars and driving that throughout the business. Yeah, I think there's probably a few other things, but I think they, from a high level perspective, are some of the real critical areas to begin to drive that D&I culture and engage a more diverse workforce going forward.
Thanks, Jermaine. So Fran, just reflecting on that, how do we balance off social mobility with labour market demands? So there was an interesting announcement this morning from central government that UC claimants are going to have less time to be able to secure a job in their area of expertise, or, you know, before they're going to be encouraged to take a job in a different part of the economy. So how do we try and balance some of these things off when employers do need support? They do need people to go and work in their businesses. It's a difficult situation.
It is. I think you're right. And do you know, I think really, really interesting hearing what Jermaine's talking about there from the perspective of an employer and someone who works with employers really grappling with some of these questions, and got a huge amount of insight there. Because I think one of the key things to it is to understand that this, not to put things in kind of separate boxes a lot of the time. So for sort of thinking about, well, what are the issues for people in your lower income parts of the city, those young people who are not going into work, thinking about the racial injustice, gender inequality, and let's sort of pit, they're layers of an onion, aren't they? So how can we understand who are these groups of people who are facing multiple barriers to living good lives in the city, and then I think one of the things that's really important is and I think this is something that you're on, which is great, is starting to say, well, some of this has got to be about how we build collaboration between some of the big sort of powerful players in the city, whether big businesses or the public sector players, and some of those organizations at a community level who really are right there alongside some of these people in their day-to-day lives, experiencing the things that they're going through. And the places that I've seen this kind of that movement, you know, that the opportunities for people to, yes, get into an entry-level job but then stay there and progress through and do sort of, you know, get through to a good job, have been where there's been a really strong relationship between that voluntary community sector organisations and those big sort of employers and powerful players to really meet people where they're at, understand their needs, and to not just funnel people through into pathways, but to see that these are relationships often strongest in the voluntary sector that can then support people into really good work that does give them that progression route through, and not just be bouncing in and out of these kind of insecure, lower paid jobs, which are a lot of the time what we're seeing. So I think that I think there's a huge part here about how do you build these strong relationships of which you guys are sort of pointing towards, of where the power between grassroots organisations and bigger players can really add a lot.
So when we did our future talent plan consultation, you know, alongside digital, one of the areas that, you know, that's kind of needing, you know, a strong kind of labour market is social care. And, you know, we know that social care doesn't pay, you know, very well. And this is where some of the tensions start to exist, that we want to encourage people to go into caring roles, but the pay isn't necessarily as good as other roles. And you know, how do we kind of, as a city, how can we balance some of that out in terms of encouraging people to go into really rewarding careers and valued careers that might have a low pay starting point, versus, say, kind of doing a digital boot camp and getting into the digital sector, which is also, you know, really important, a really important part of our city growth. It's not an easy one to resolve. I wonder what your reflections are, Councillor Pryor, around that one.
No, I'd agree with that. I know. Sorry, I was just reading the chat as well, where it's saying that it's really important for communities and neighbourhoods to be involved, and I think that's such an important point. You know, when we are looking at kind of the wider, sorry, I've got a cat on my knee, the wider importance of kind of diversifying that workforce and getting new people into jobs. When you look at the breakdown of the city, it's not just about say looking at kind of the breakdown of the Black and Asian and other minority ethnic groups, seeing those age groups as well. So when we go down to schools, BAME groups make up almost 40% of young people in Leeds, whereas the much older population, it's far smaller. So kind of the people who are going to be looking for jobs in Leeds in 5, 10, 15 years are a completely different makeup. So we need to be working to remove those barriers now. Apprenticeships is one area where BAME people are massively underrepresented, and we need to make sure those opportunities are there from a young age. There was another comment in the chat about from BDP, where kind of because they're looking at people further along in the chain, if that work hasn't been done before, they're kind of not ready to take on those employers. So I think that's why it's important to work with communities, work with schools, almost think about that kind of supply chain for years ahead. I remember I was doing some work on in a previous job on HS2, which obviously probably not coming to Leeds now, back in 2011, and we were saying, well, the apprentices who will be working on HS2 are just starting primary school now. So it was no point looking at kind of who the apprentices were in 2011. You've got to go right back. So I think that's where we need some more kind of joined up thinking and looking at career paths.
Yeah, thank you. I think I noticed that we do have a head partnership on today as well. So a bit of a shout out for them and the brilliant work that they've done across the city and continue to do, and particularly the initiative they're doing at the moment with the digital sector. And very happy for you to put the details around that in the chat as well, so people can hear about that. I think Steph was on, so please do that, Steph, if you're on. Taking us back to the matter in hand, Jermaine, how do you think we can sort of collaborate more across, say, employers, public and private, to be able to address some of these issues? So obviously you're particularly focused on diversity and inclusion. So have you collaborated with other employers around that? How do you kind of share your knowledge and expertise on the employer side to support, and how do you think we as a city could kind of keep doing more on that agenda?
Yeah, I think Francis mentioned quite a few good points there in terms of collaboration. I can't stress that enough, really, how important that is really to tackle some of these issues. I think Francis again mentioned the universities tying in with the educational institutions for private businesses and doing work around that. I think there's also a lot of socially driven enterprises now that are trying to do a lot in niche areas. Not to give a shout out, but there's one in particular that I worked with a few years ago by the name of 2020 Change, working with typically in the London Black community to level up and provide opportunities there. So I think partnering with some of those charities, and actually, we're looking to hire a people and performance manager to actually own that piece where we engage with external partners, whether that's universities, whether that's more socially focused charities or whatever it might be, to increase our footprint and do more. So yeah, it can't be done by individuals or just individual organizations. I think also there's a lot of scope and room there for the private sector to actually link up with other organizations in the private sector. So I think it's creating those pathways and collaborating across the board, really.
Yeah, I think if we were in a real room, I'm pretty sure that Dawn from Shine would probably reach out to you after the session. So Dawn, feel free to link with Jermaine, because Shine is a kind of community-based charity that works in Hare Hills. She's done some great stuff with Sarah Tulip and into the area. So
I am familiar with the Shine. Yeah, historically,
brilliant. Okay,
I did some
good.
community care work many years. Even reaching out. I mean, years ago, I've done lots of charity work, and in particular around Hare Hills and Chapeltown over the years, and worked with Shine some years back. And it's collaborating with organisations like that. Even some of the local religious institutions as well have been fantastic over the years. The mosque in Hare Hills and several churches. So I think that's key. There's also a wider context here, because I think that, and I probably come from a little bit of a biased slant here, but there's also a question of, probably many people on this call and people in leadership capacity. It can be quite easy sometimes for us to maybe sponsor these programs or have D&I on our agenda, but actually, are we actually personally engaging with some of those organizations and actually, doing what we can to be, at the forefront and providing an example for people who maybe are in a slightly less advantaged position. Because I think that's one of the real problems as well is, yes, you may come from an underprivileged background and unfortunately, you probably don't have that example as well, or have the opportunity to spend half an hour with somebody who's, reached a sea level and ask them some questions and actually realize that there is a pathway for me, and, I aren't necessarily fully hindered by my age, the color of my skin, my disability challenges. So I do think there's a lot that we can do as well from a leadership capacity.
Thank you. And I think that's just brilliantly put, speaking from one business to two other businesses in the city. And actually, I think there is a real opportunity in Leeds, and certainly in the digital sector, a huge amount of collaboration going on and a will to really want to engage in a really meaningful way, not in a sort of ad hoc one-off way that actually sometimes can be worse for communities than being sustained. So we've got around 10 minutes left, and what I'd like to do next is just maybe lean us into the topic that we'll be getting into after the break, which is a little bit around, in relation to the Great Jobs Agenda, how are we going to cope with this transition that we're going to have to make to a greener economy? The speed at which we're going to need to do that is going to require so much collaboration and effort from skills providers, from employers. Kind of how can we make sure that we do that in a way that doesn't leave people behind? So I'm going to ask Fran maybe if she wants to sort of give a little bit of a view on that first, and then I'll ask everybody else to just give a bit of a view too. So Fran.
Brilliant, thanks Eve. Yeah, so important, and I think it looks really brilliant session after the break. I mean, loads to say here. I think just to pick out two things. The first is around the jobs question, because I think we can all be like, it's so brilliant, we're going to get all these jobs, and Leeds is set to do really well out of that. But it's a bit like your point, Councillor Pryor, about the apprentices to HS2 and who they are now, where they are in the system, because actually lots of those jobs are, looking at the sort of makeup of green jobs, are going to be quite high level jobs. And if you look at who's getting them at the moment, they're not people who are coming in at entry level, they're people who are coming in from a professional career, do something else first. And so how are we going to, if we're going to make those the opportunity to really break that kind of the persistent sort of rump of low paid work that there is still in all over the UK, then we need to be doing things right now, right in the weeds, the stuff that you've been doing through the Anchor Network over the years, of those pathways to get people right into the right place for those jobs, whether they're in green finance or in construction or whatever it is. So I think it's good, hard, roll up your sleeves work, that green jobs work, isn't it? It's not sort of like, oh, well, we're going to do well, that'll be great. And I know that that's not how you take it. I think the second thing is, and it relates to the supply chain point for the anchors, but it's wider, and that is, how hungry is Leeds to grow their own in this economy? Because there's loads of massive players out there ready to swoop on the green jobs world, isn't there? And to and to, you know, there's money to be made in it, and quite right to it. But are you in a position on retrofit, for example, good one to get started with, to make sure that it's the local construction firms in Leeds that are going to get that work? And can you use your buying power to pump prime some of that investment and skills development, and that be led by the private sector, to make sure that what you end up with is a green economy that's made up of all sorts of wonderful social, private, small, medium-sized businesses, a kind of patchwork of them for Leeds, rather than necessarily a place where perhaps you're dominated by some of those big players coming in and taking out as much as they perhaps put in. So I think those are the really exciting prospects for this agenda.
Thanks, Fran. So, Councillor Pryor, I know we've already started some work in this area, and I think we'd be the first to admit there's a lot more to do as well. But do you want to maybe tell everyone a little bit of a flavour of what we've started?
Yeah, so, and I guess that kind of green jobs covers a huge amount of things. There are the green jobs where kind of those jobs are actively contributing to the green agenda, such as in Leeds, we've got a lot of work on decarbonising public buildings. We've got a huge amount of investment there. But then also there's a huge amount of the green jobs element, which is about jobs which aren't necessarily on the green agenda, but those jobs don't kind of make the climate crisis worse. There's some huge statistics about kind of a lot of millennials who are now a lot older than people think millennials are, but who don't own a car. So we need to be looking at kind of where people are living and where those places of work are, and those, you know, either making active travel a lot easier so people can get to and from work in a green way, or just putting homes right next to jobs, you know, having those sort of employment hubs where people don't need that. Francis, you know, making great points about how we need to kind of, they're quite skilled jobs, some of these, and we do really need to be thinking about this now. Eve, you mentioned a head partnership before, who do fantastic work in a lot of this, in kind of preparing young people for where the jobs market's going to be years from now. There's some great work on getting young women into STEM, you know, kind of those opportunities where it's amazing how young some children are when they start to either rule in or rule out certain careers that might be ahead of them for all young people. So actually kind of getting those options on the table now is so important. I see that Paul Chatterton's made a point in the chat box about how the Great Jobs Agenda is about the future of the planet. And yes, absolutely. You know, we want to make sure not just there are good jobs available, but those are green jobs which are either are contributing to the green agenda, or at least kind of being part of that. And absolutely that the groundwork for that needs to happen, well, 30 years ago ideally, but kind of we need to be working on it now to make sure that those paths are there.
Yeah, thank you. So I noticed the comment that Paul had shared about a young climate activist as well. And for me, I think, and also the comments about the discussion being really optimistic, and I think that's really important. I think you can be really pessimistic about the climate emergency. But I did, you know, there's a couple of books that I read last year that really focused my mind on, actually, we have to be optimistic about what we can do, because we have the power to take action. And it's not about the next generation having to take that action. It's about us taking the action now to enable that next generation to follow on from us when they get into, you know, their, when they get into their working age. And to help those young people see that there's an optimistic future despite the challenges around the climate emergency. Completely different cultural reference, but I did just finish reading a Caitlin Moran book, which she talks about, you know, in that, about the mental health issues of her daughter, and how she feels like that the young generation, you know, get so worried about some of these challenges, and we have to make sure that actually, you know, we're using our opportunity to really address them. So I'm pleased that people have found this discussion optimistic this morning, because I think we are optimistic realists in Leeds. You know, we want to tackle these problems, we want to do it together. and the challenges, and I'm really looking forward to the next section. But before we move on to that, Sarah, I wonder whether you want to come on the green agenda, and just to prepare everybody else. I'm then going to come to the panel for some just closing remarks before we wrap up. So Sarah?
Yeah. So I think in terms of the green agenda, I mean, where our focus has been as an anchor institution is, we've mentioned carbon footprint. I think Jonathan mentioned it in terms of the Leeds City Council building, so that's really important to us. But I think the other element that's important in terms of how we work is the sense of community. So definitely looking for partnerships across the city, looking at how we can partner with communities or parts of the community, either working with students or our outreach work in schools as well, so that we're sort of focusing in that area in terms of sort of well-being, and how we do that. One of the other areas is about how we use our own assets, if you like, our own buildings, and whether we should be doing more to make more of our buildings more accessible to more in the community, you know, so that they're not just available if you are a student at the university, but there are other ways in which you might be able to work with the university and access some of our facilities. So I think there's two of the main ways that we're working at the moment. The other element we have is the way we work with students in terms of preparing them for work. So preparing our students and supporting our students to be work ready, I guess, in terms of the jobs and the roles in which they can take on in Leeds and the region. So that they would be the sort of three closing comments for me about that green agenda piece.
Thanks, Sarah. So, gosh, we've covered quite a lot of ground in this section. So good luck to each of the panelists to give a few sort of closing remarks. But maybe I'll go with Fran first, and just so I'm warning you, then I'm going to go to Jermaine, then Sarah, then Councillor Pryor.
Yeah.
Thanks, Eve. Well, yeah, absolutely, masses to mull. I guess two things really stand out for me. One is, it is absolutely clear that you've got everything you need to be doing all of this. I mean, just hearing the few sort of voices on the panel this morning, and the sort of tip of the iceberg that it's, you know, in terms of the work that's already gone on and the relationships are there. So I think that, and where you're setting your sights. So you've got huge amounts to go on, and I do a lot of this work in lots of parts of the country, and it feels like you're in extremely kind of good shape. I think the second point is how just keeping on this, the size of the prize. You know, 1 in 7 jobs in the city, massive reach and potential that you've got through the anchor network, and obviously beyond that in terms of the people that the wider group that you're working with. So it's really easy, isn't it, to kind of get drawn into like, well, let's get on and practical and do something, and it's kind of like down in the hundreds of people level. But there's something, isn't there, about the opportunity you've really got here is to shift into the thousands and the tens of thousands of jobs and people affected. And I think if you can keep the eye on that prize, then you won't go far wrong. So yeah, you've got everything that you need, and make that scale and heft that you've got really work for you, I'd say.
Thank you for those words of encouragement. Jermaine?
Yeah, I'm also just trying to scale it so we can take something away. I think I heard something a couple of months ago on a podcast which really stuck with me, and it was a leader, a Hispanic leader in the US who used kind of a story of using an elevator, and he was saying that, you know, we might be on the 10th floor, and actually it's not about maybe moving to the 9th, 8th, 7th, but actually it's about sending the elevator down to the next generation, and those who maybe are, you know, at ground 0 or ground 1 for whatever it is, circumstances, disadvantages, whatever it may be, and actually giving them that opportunity to take the elevator up to the 10th level with us. So I think if we can employ that philosophy, whether that's public sector, private sector, whatever function it is, and add that into our kind of values and daily life, that's going to make a large contribution as a whole, if each of us can do our part. And I think probably 3 takeaways for me are, you know, having a a good D&I program to help remove some of those barriers. The second thing is having flexible programs for people to get into work. A client we work with recently really struggled to find technical talent, and actually completely changed their job requirements to needing someone for 2 or 3 days, and was absolutely overwhelmed with the applications. And actually those applications came from a lot of people who have accessibility challenges, a lot of mums who were juggling work, and actually the productivity, the diversity of the team absolutely shot up, because she'd removed those barriers and opened up opportunity for a whole different sector of people who maybe, you know, didn't really have that opportunity to get into that line of work. And then I think the third thing for me is, which you mentioned already, Eve, is making those collaboration links. I think that's absolutely key for our city to move to that next stage.
Thanks, Jermaine. And Sarah?
So some of the things that I've been thinking about, one is around skills development and what we really mean by the skills that we need for hybrid working. So one of the things that I've been thinking about, and I was reading something the other day as well, where the writer was saying hybrid working and digital working is not just about doing your existing poor practices and poor processes online. You know, we need to be thinking much more creatively and innovatively about really how we do things differently, and therefore what's the skill set that we really need from a creative and innovative point of view to really change how we work, rather than just switch on a laptop and say that's hybrid working. So I guess that's something that I've been thinking about. And I've also been thinking about what we mean by true flexibility. So we know at the university that our staff want more flexibility. We've done colleague surveys and we've done pulse surveys about it, but we don't really understand yet what that actually means, because what we're also picking up is a real sense from quite a proportion of our community that they want to be back in the office, they want to be collaborating, they want that face-to-face contact, and that might be, you know, just from the social connectivity for collaboration purposes, for that feeling of community, you know, and actually remote working for such a long period of time, which is nearly 2 years. There's a bit of a disconnectedness in the sort of broader sense. So how do we re-engage our employees and develop the skills that might have stagnated while we've been in a bit of crisis mode? So there's some of the sort of broader things that I've been thinking about the transition, that is more about development and skills and what we really need going forward if we're going to change the way we work.
Thank you, Sarah. And Councillor Pryor, one of the questions that I missed in the chat was about universal basic income, which I don't propose we go into a discussion in the roundabout now, but I wonder whether you want to give a view on that as part of your comments in wrapping up.
Yeah, I mean, universal basic income is such an interesting idea, particularly kind of as a country, as a world, we move to potentially more automation. I think it is something which we do need to be looking seriously at. It's something which, if the government were kind of cooperative, I would love to run a trial in Leeds. I think there are some real merits to it, absolutely. Just to pick up something else from the chat, which I think kind of brings everything together quite nicely. Lucy from TCV was talking about green jobs and how it's not just kind of the high strategy sort of stuff. There's a lot more there as well. I visited, I think it was called the Boot Repair Company near Elland Road a couple of weeks ago, and it's got quite an unassuming front, and then you go in and it just opens up into this enormous warehouse, and they take kind of boots, shoes, Doc Martens, and repair them. They you know, they take them away from landfill. It's a great green job, but the way they're talking about their employers, there was that level of flexibility and having a decent wage. And even though some of this stuff was quite skilled, they were all entry-level jobs that they kind of trained you up as you were there. And it was that great example of having really green jobs that was also a great job, that was also something where kind of workers had a career path, they kind of had a decent wage, and you could hear kind of the loyalty that some of those employees spoke about their employer. There was a really great relationship there, and I think that's exactly what we need to be pushing more and more. I love Eve when she was talking about that kind of optimistic realism that we have in Leeds, and I think, yes, we've got all kind of the people in place, and there's a lot to do now. There's a lot we can do now, but also preparing for the future. So kind of the world we're passing on is the one we want.
Thank you. So thank you to all the panel, and also thank you to all of you for all the brilliant engagement on the chat, all the questions and the sharing. What we'll do in response to the panel is we will, when we issue the links to the meeting, also do a note which includes the links that were shared. But we'll also just describe how we'll take the output of this panel into some of the work that we're going to be doing as a council, but with the city as well. So some of the things we discussed today will feed into the future talent plan work, for example, and also the green economy activity. So what I just want to say is thank you so much to each one of you for the time that you've given this morning. And I know it takes preparation time as well to commit to doing a panel. So thank you so much for being with us. I think it's been a great discussion. I hope you can stay for what's coming next as well, because I think we're about to get some really interesting discussion as well. For everybody else, we do have a break now so that you can take a moment to go and put your kettle on, or to go and visit the little boys or girls room and return. Now, we are slightly over, and Nigel, I'm going to take an executive decision and say we'll return at 11:15 so that people do have 10 minutes to be able to go and make a cup of tea and return, and we'll start promptly at 15:15 because we have Kate with us. So just make sure when you just come back in that you are on mute if you come in just a little after 15:15, because we will start at 11:15 with Kate. So thank you for your contributions so far, and look forward to seeing you all again at 15:15.
Welcome back, everyone. Can I thank Eve for a great session before the break. It was absolutely fantastic, really. Great discussion. Panelists were fabulous as well. We've now got a session on donut economics with Kate Raworth, who's the co-founder and the developer of the donut economics model, and Leonora Gertschfer, who is the City and Regions Lead at Donut Economics Actions Lab, or DEAL, not the deal in Kent, for those who know it. So we're going to hear from Kate and Leonora for about 15, 20 minutes, and then we'll open it up to a question and answer session. Same applies as to before the break. If you can keep yourself on mute, and if you could put your questions in the chat and any comments, and then we'll pick them up and we'll put them to Kate and Leonora. So I think over to you, Kate, if that's okay.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be joining you all today. I'm sitting in the city of Amsterdam, which is a city that's adopted the donut in its circularity policy. And I'm really keen to be talking with you and with my colleague Leonora about what the donut has to do with Leeds. Delighted to be here with Climate Action Leeds and the Leeds Donut Coalition too. So let's kick off. I'll start by sharing my screen. And we're going to talk about donuts, not the ones to eat. Those aren't good for us. This is the one that actually turns out to be good for us. And it's conceptual. So I want to pull out of Leeds, actually. Let's just pull out of Leeds, pull out of the UK. Let's stand back and start by recognizing that the 21st century has begun with repeated crises that impact in everyone's lives. From financial meltdown in 2008 to this era of climate and ecological breakdown, we've seen a massive rise in social protest worldwide, and yet there's also been a crackdown on environmental protesters. 2020 was the most dangerous year on record to be a defender of the living world. And we've seen and lived through the last 2 years of COVID lockdown. These crises may be reported differently in the news, but they deeply show us patterns that we should know, that we are profoundly connected with each other and with the rest of the living world. These patterns arise from the systems we have created, and they hit people with sharp inequalities. Inequalities of gender and race, of wealth and power, inequalities between the global north and the global south. We believe that these patterns tell us we must transform away from systems that pursue endless expansion to systems that bring us into balance. And so we need a new vision of what progress looks like. And one way to that is the donut. So here it is. What's the goal? It's very simple. Leave nobody in the hole, falling short on the essentials of life. That's where people do not have the resources for health and education, housing, political voice, income, community, equity, that make life good. Every government in the world has already agreed that every person in the world has a claim to these essentials because they're at the heart of the Sustainable Development Goals. Leave no one in the hole. But as we aim to meet people's needs, we transform the surface of the earth. We use water. We've been using fossil fuels. We use Earth's materials. And as we do that, we risk going beyond an ecological ceiling where we put so much pressure on the life support systems of our planetary home, we kick our Earth out of balance. These are the 9 planetary boundaries that make life work on this planet. So the goal is to leave no one in the hole, but don't overshoot the limits. It sounds so simple, and yet this is a profound challenge of our times, because right now we are far, far out of balance, as all of the red in this picture shows. Billions of people worldwide fall short on their most essential needs. And we know that happens predominantly in low-income countries, but there is poverty in the midst of plenty in every city. And we are already overshooting multiple planetary boundaries. Indeed, just last week, the Earth system scientists said, we're not only overshooting on climate change, on excessive land conversion, on fertilizer use and the loss of biodiversity, we also now know we are massively overshooting on our creation and use of chemical pollutants like plastics, like persistent organic pollutants and synthetics. So we are way out of balance, and our responsibility is to turn this story around. I profoundly believe this is what our children and their children will judge us for. What did the people at the beginning of the 21st century do? once they knew the challenges we face. And they'll ask us that globally, they'll ask us that nationally, and they'll ask us that locally. So here is the national story. When we come down a level, nations are in very, very different situations on this. These national donuts have been created by one of our colleagues, Andrew Fanning, and his colleagues from Leeds University. So this is from Leeds. We can see Malawi on $1,000 per person per year is still massively falling short of meeting people's needs without putting excessive pressure on the planet. China, a double whammy of shortfall and overshoot. There's the UK, doing better than many countries in the world because we are one of the richest nations in the world. That center of circle should be completely blue. And yet we've got significant inequality and we know deprivation that doesn't even show up here. But we're massively overshooting planetary boundaries, as is the US over here. So every country is on a journey of transformation. And for me, this says there's no nation in the world that should go around calling itself a developed country, an advanced nation. They don't exist. There is nothing advanced or developed about overshooting planetary boundaries. So we must all transform. And this comes right to the heart of how we create and take forward the future of our cities and our settlements. How do we transform then? We need to transform two fundamental dynamics in our economies. We've inherited economies that are linear and degenerative by design. The industrial systems that created the wealth from the past, we now know do not serve us because they take Earth's materials, make them into stuff we want, use it for a while, and then throw it away. And that take, make, use, lose, that pushes us over planetary boundaries. It breaks down the living systems of the world. We need to create regenerative, circular and cyclical economies where resources are not used up, they are used again and again, and we regenerate, repair, and restore the life support systems of our planet. We sequester carbon, we bring back nature, we rewild land so that we actually make our living systems work again and we come to belong. What does this look like at the scale of cities? Some cities that have been bringing this about. I'm sitting in Amsterdam. Oh, sorry, my slides have jumped. Here we are. I'm sitting in Amsterdam, which has put circularity at the heart of its vision. So there are neighborhoods where everything that gets built there must be built with circular materials that must be used again and again. Oslo has a car-free city center, getting fossil fuels, last century's energy source, getting fossil fuels out of mobility at the city center. We've seen places bring back ecological life, whether it's through rooftop farming or empty plot farming, and bringing trees in to create that urban forest effect. But there are, of course, many, many more ways of regenerative design in cities. And then the second trait we need to bring back is recognizing that we must transform this dynamic from divisive to distributive. We've inherited economic structures through infrastructure, through regulation, through privilege and power that tend to be divisive by design, capturing opportunity and value in the hands of a few. We've seen the rise of a global 1%. We see that widening inequality nationally and between North and South in the UK. And we must create spaces that are distributive by design so that value created is shared far more equitably with all who co-create it. What can that look like in cities? I'm in Amsterdam. Here, the bicycle comes first, trams come second, the car is very much third. This is a distributed, affordable form of transport for all. Edinburgh is one of the places that's bringing in solar panels, but owning them through cooperatives. Solar energy is the future, as is wind power, but it doesn't have to be owned by multinational companies. It can be owned locally. And that means the value of creating that electricity is regenerated and recirculated in the local economy. How can social housing be both low carbon and affordable and high quality and desirable? Milan is one of the new cities taking that on, starting to build its first low carbon social housing. But I have to make a call out to the Lily project in Leeds of the low impact living that Leeds, I think, has really led and showing that this can be done together, low impact and socially affordable. And then lastly here, anchor institutions can play a really key role in opening up opportunity. The Cleveland Hospital in Ohio recognized that nobody from the neighborhood around it worked in the hospital. They created a bridging program to open up employment to women who are returning from maternity leave, to people with one conviction who deserve that second chance. And they really actively expanded the opportunity of employment in that anchor institution. These are just 4 ways of creating far more distributive cities. I know Leeds has got some things happening, and there are many, many more that we can do everywhere. So let me show you what it means when we unroll a donut and explore it. And I'm thrilled that Paul Chatterton and the team from Climate Action Leeds and the Leeds Donut Coalition will be following this presentation with a deeper dive into that. So can Leeds live in the donut? We should all be asking this in every city worldwide. What would it mean? Well, we can unroll the donut, open it up, and then we get a space where we can dive inside and explore possible futures that you can create. And of course, this exploration is for you. It's your journey and your ideas and possibilities. So every place owns its own imagined future. Let me take us in. Here's the question. How can Leeds become a home to thriving people in a thriving place while respecting the well-being of all people and the health of the whole planet? That question breaks out into 4 sub-questions. The first, and we've got local aspirations for Leeds, and then your global responsibilities in relation to the rest of the world, because we know we're interconnected. So how can all the people of Leeds thrive? What would it mean for all the people in their full diversity of history and heritage and culture and values? What would it mean for everybody in Leeds to be living above that social foundation, to have the essentials of life? Where's the biggest place that's lacking? Where can you most make progress? How can Leeds be as generous as the wildland next door? So nature is generous in every place. She sequesters carbon, she stores groundwater, she cleanses the air, she regulates the climate, she houses wildlife. How can Leeds, in the way the infrastructure and the buildings of the city are constructed, welcome back and aim to match that generosity of nature? Those are the local aspirations. Then the global responsibilities. How can Leeds respect the health of the whole planet? Think of the food, clothing, electronics, construction materials that are imported into your city every day, and that stream of waste that goes out. That is what is pushing our nation and our cities way over planetary boundaries. We must come back within. What will that journey look like in your city? And still thinking of those global supply chains, think of the people who stitch the clothes, who pack food, who dig the construction materials, who mine the lithium and the cobalt. How can their rights be respected through government procurement, through retailers who have the privilege of selling in your city's high streets? So these are the 4 lenses of the donut. And I'm thrilled that Climate Action Leeds are taking this as a framework and diving into it as part of the future exploration. Here's what any city can do, taking that framework and thinking about all the dimensions. You can then, once you've got your own framework and thought about your local targets and your indicators of where we are now, how you're currently performing, you can also put at the heart of it a topic that matters. Let's say the future of housing. And then you can look at it holistically through the 4 lenses. So how could you create a city that has affordable, low carbon housing? Yes, that is a photograph from Leeds, and I show it worldwide because it's a great example. That's also from Vienna, which has affordable housing, social housing for 60% of the population. How can Leeds create housing that brings back nature, that sequesters carbon, whether through timber with green roofs, that brings wildlife back in so people living there feel reconnected with the living world around us? And we know that's good for all of our health. How can Leeds create housing that uses far fewer materials, that is circular in design like Amsterdam, that is much lower carbon, that actually generates its own energy? And how can Leeds take action to respect the rights of workers, whether it's migrant workers coming into the city if they're involved in that construction, or workers throughout global supply chains who supply the materials that make this possible? As you can see, the answers don't come from outside. The answers will come from inside. They'll come from your city, what you know is possible, what you already see is happening, and what you can see happening in other parts of the world. This is a framework that doesn't tell you answers, but it gives you space to come up with much more holistic answers of your own. I'm now going to pass to my colleague Leonora, who's just going to give us a few examples of how this framework is being used worldwide.
Thank you, Kate. In the past 2 years, really, many cities around the world have taken these concepts of donut economics and started putting them into practice, exploring different ways to get started, embedding them into policymaking, into strategy, into how they measure progress, and how they bring different stakeholders and sectors together to build common visions. And these 4 lenses that Kate just shared have been the starting point of most of these processes and conversations, starting from the City Donut workshops in Philadelphia, in Portland, and in Amsterdam in 2019, where stakeholders from different departments came together, bringing different visions, targets, measures of progress, started to build this 4-lens portrait of their city, seeing their cities holistically with all their strengths and gaps and blind spots that start coming up on the surface once you bring all of these lenses together. And this allowed them to start building collective visions for progress, drawing from everybody's experiences from all of these different viewpoints. Amsterdam and the city portrait. Amsterdam used the city portrait and the donut to develop its very ambitious circular strategy, focusing specifically on construction, on food, and on textile sectors. And they build the vision for a city as a thriving, inclusive, regenerative city for all residents while respecting the planetary boundaries, a powerful way to state their vision publicly and to embed it into the way that they're going ahead with their circularity. In Nanaimo, a city in Canada, the council adopted the donut economic model as a cohesive vision for all city initiatives and planning processes. So really an overarching guiding framework. Developing a donut city portrait allowed them to integrate their numerous policies and strategies that were, in their own words, incoherent with one another, very often even contradicting each other, missing out on opportunities and even creative negative impacts. So bringing their vision together into one holistic vision for the city based on the donut allowed them to see it all at the same time, really, to put all policies and strategies together and build one vision for the city. And after developing a set of metrics and indicators, they use this as an evaluation tool to evaluate 3 scenarios for land use planning. One was the status quo, and the other 2 were alternative possibilities. So this allowed them to see which scenario is the most consistent with the vision that the city had set for itself as part of the donut. And in Birmingham, in the UK, an organization called Civic Square has been exploring on a very different level what a neighborhood donut is. On the ground, going on a joint journey of learning and education and discussion with the residents, with the children and young people in a neighborhood, in this local community, so they jointly understand what thriving within the means of the planet would mean for them. And these are just few of many examples around the world. We have more and more cities in Europe, but also in South America, in Southeast Asia, in Africa, that are one after another picking up these concepts and finding always unique and different ways to put them into practice. And we're very excited that today we'll be hearing from the Leeds team about how the Leeds is getting started in its engagement with the donut. Thank you.
That's fantastic, Kate, Leonora, really good. It's great to see examples as well of where the success has been. And we've got a number of questions in the chat. I mean, one of them, I'll go straight to it. One of the points that have been made is clearly you've shown examples of success. There will be challenges. Not everybody believes where we are in the world. How do we address that? And you know, what sort of approaches have you seen that have been successful elsewhere?
I'll jump in, and I'm sure Leonora will follow. We've found that the strongest motivation for people is inspiration from other places. So as Donut Economics Action Lab, we have never once lobbied anybody, appealed to anybody, requested, trying to persuade anybody to engage with these concepts and these tools. Because there are so many people in places, whether town councillors, whether mayors, whether community activists and organisers, whether teachers, who say, you know what, we know we need to transform, and these tools look useful to us, so we're going to pick them up and start working with them. That's where we put our energy. And then when those folks share back their examples, as you just said, Nigel, it's so inspiring to see what other places are doing. Those are all people in places who said, this makes sense to us, and this is how we're going to take it forward. Our role then is just to amplify that back, because they are the true practitioners who are figuring out what it makes sense to tell a story of transformation in place, to know where to start, where they are, to know what appeals to people locally. So our role is to bring that back and work with those who already have that momentum. It's so easy to feel huge resistance in the world and to feel that things can't be done. And yet there's just so much that is happening. I personally feel the more that we turn light towards what is happening, we help reinforce it happening and build it happening elsewhere. And I'm sure Leonora might want to add her own perspective. No? Okay.
We're happy to go to the next question.
No, I mean, it's great. I mean, that's what today has been about sharing. And I think a lot of the discussion about how you work in partnership and not taking a one size fits all. I mean, one of the questions we've got is that there are clearly policy frameworks in place, planning and transport and housing and various other things. I mean, I'm assuming you donut economics, you work within the system. You might seek to adjust it, but how does that apply?
Well, certainly the system that we have, the system that any city has inherited is the starting point. But working with donut economics is a lot about setting forward a transformative agenda for the future. And that also involves revealing the gaps and insufficiencies of the systems that we have in place. So with cities, one of the other, Kate shared the kind of the 4-lens approach. Another kind of analytical framework that we work with is really looking into the deep systemic design of cities and of places. We look across these 5 themes, 5 design traits: the purpose of a place, the networks of a place, the governance, the ownership, and the finance. So really everything that's underlying, including all of these policies, whether it's how land is owned in the UK, how the national planning framework allows us to intervene in space and plan and build. So for a lot of cities, working with donut economics is also, it's also about introducing a framework that would allow us to critically identify the gaps of the systems. What would it take to have a thriving Leeds, and what are the policies that we have in place, in Leeds or in the UK right now that are actually obstacles at this moment and that should be changed, and how can we be taking local action to be demonstrating these insufficiencies as well through this new lens that we've adopted. So, and that's, that goes for any country and for any place really. Every place has policies that were, let's say, less century policies. Every place has policies that need to be changed. Yes, Kate.
And I'll just add an example. So the city of Toronto contacted us. Again, they saw what was happening in Amsterdam, and a councillor in the city of Toronto said, I really want to explore whether this is useful in our city. And the first thing he said is, of course, we already have a COVID recovery plan. We have a housing plan. We have an economic strategy. Can we work with those? And of course, the starting point is when we take those 4 lenses that I showed, the first thing we can do is plot on top of that the major strands from these different strategies. What they've found in Toronto is what's useful is like, oh, and now we can see an overview of it all in one place. It's not now held in these separate strategies. And the photographs that Leonora was showing from Philly and Portland and Amsterdam, those are people who work on transport and housing and education and equity. And they were just saying, at last, we're in one room and we can see our strategies together. So the framework doesn't replace existing strategies. It helps bring them together and then says, and where can we find holistic synergy? Where can we raise our ambition?
Okay, that's really important, because what we've talked about in this morning session as well is about this partnership and about opening it up to make sure that we do get that cross-discipline approach. I mean, one of the questions that's come up, and it does come up quite often in our discussions, is the topic of growth in itself and how we define growth. What does we mean by growth? I mean, you've taken a very interesting approach to that. You've looked at it, as you say, at a planetary level. How do you deal with this question about the term growth, and what does it actually mean within donut economics?
So donut economics starts with the donut, which is about thriving, humanity thriving within the means of the living planet. And I think as an economist and from a training from, which I think I inherited an old training, which growth was just the goal. And anybody here on this call, whoever studied economics will know what I'm talking about. Just if this generates growth, tick, good. Now we know too much. we now know that a lot of the ways that we were generating growth in the past and still today were emitting massive carbon emissions, running down the living planet. And actually, a lot of the money that we call growth ends up in the hands of people who already have very, very full pockets. So the shareholders are getting a great return, but the median wage ain't rising. And so our standards have gone up. It's not enough just to say, oh, we need a growing economy. What we need is an economy that ensures that no one is left below the social foundation. And that means ensuring there are jobs for everybody, that there is affordable housing, that where we are investing, where we are creating economic activity, helps bring everybody out from below that foundation. But we're doing it in ways that we never had to do before, because we also need to reduce our carbon emissions. This is why we must move to investing in renewable energy, investing in clean energy public transport, investing in social housing that's built in ways that is using far more low impact materials. It's investing in a circular economy, which, by the way, brings jobs back locally, because things need to be repaired and reused and refurbished locally. They don't get extracted out through global supply chains. So for me, it's about thriving. And that's a really important word. We need economies that thrive. It means definitely some sectors need to grow and others need to let go and leave. And it's about balancing that. And I want to recognize that I know in the space of politics, whether it's national or local, there's been a very long dominant narrative that we need to talk about growth as if that were alone good. And I think we need to nuance that. We need a socially just transition, and we need to return to living on the planet. We have deprivation in the midst of many of our cities, including in Leeds, including in Amsterdam, where I am now, and Oxford, where I live. But we also live in one of the richest countries in the world. And we need to rebalance how wealth is created in this country and who owns the sources of wealth creation, who owns the land and the housing, who owns the enterprises. And there's so much that places can do to bring about that rebalancing, so we have a more distributive and thriving economy that doesn't depend upon saying we endlessly need growth, because that ain't going to work on planet Earth.
And I think you've made some really important points, you and Leonora there. I mean, one of the things that's come up within the chat and the questions that have been posed is, I think you've got a lot of support from the people who are, by their nature, who are part of our session today. How do we get the message across on a wider scale? How do we bring the whole of the city with us? What approaches have you and Leonora seen that we can genuinely bring everyone and engage them in that way?
Well, I can go ahead, and I can start by saying, we are, as Donut Economics Action Lab, we are very much aware that we cannot go in different places, whether it's Leeds or Cali in Colombia, and be saying what is the right way to engage with people, because we're not from there. We're not the local community. It's the local community, the local council, the city that really knows what is the right way to bring everybody on a journey. But we've certainly been seeing different examples of cities that have been doing it. In Melbourne, they have been doing this during COVID, while everybody was locked at home, an online massive participatory workshop where that kind of remained open for months and months, where this mirror board where all the citizens could kind of just join and build the vision of the city through these 4 lenses and gradually participate. In the example that I just shared in Birmingham, they're working at a very much on the ground level. They're making themselves visible. There are many, you will surely know that in each city there are, and in every consultation and participation process, depending on how it's designed, there will be voices that will be left out. There will be people that will be not a part of that journey. And especially if the processes are designed in a way that, you expect people to always come to you. So in Birmingham, they're setting an example of how to engage, how to be bringing people along on that journey by going to them. They set themselves up physically in a neighborhood, doing all these amazing, fun, engaging activities for children, allowing them to pass by and to just stop by and start learning, rather than always expecting people to, take part of their time and go to a certain place. So, bringing the conversation to people through creative means, through play often, we can be engaging with a lot of these complex concepts in very playful and creative ways. And Civic Square will be the first ones to say that, children, 5-year-old, 8-year-old children are the first ones to understand the importance of a thriving community and a thriving planet, because at their core, these concepts are so simple and they resonate very strongly with people.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That is absolutely fantastic. Well, in doing that, what you've just said there, Leonora, you've made a great sort of segue to Paul's session next. I hope you're going to stay around and participate with that session. I just want to echo what someone said in the chat. What both you and Kate have done have been fantastic in your optimism, your enthusiasm, your sort of real desire to make a change and make a difference. And I think that's come across to all of us. So I really want to thank you both for your presentation and participating in the discussion afterwards. That's been great.
Thanks, Nigel. And can I just jump in and say, I'm so sorry that I'm not able to stay. I'm really frustrated. I'm in Amsterdam and I don't know whether it's Brexit or COVID, but there's one train a day and it goes in less than 1 hour. So I have to get myself to the station. However, I'm definitely going to catch up on this afterwards, because I know that the work that is beginning now, and actually has been underway in Leeds with Paul's team, is fantastic. And I think I really know that what you're doing in Leeds, how we've seen Amsterdam inspire the world, I'm so sure that what's beginning now in Leeds is going to inspire so many other cities in the UK. Glasgow's on this too, so there's going to be an interesting learning there. But what you begin inspires others. So here's to the presentation that's just about to come, and I can't wait to work together on this over the coming months.
That's fantastic. And I've got to say, it's the first time I've heard anybody say one train in Amsterdam, because usually there's lots of them. So good luck. Hope you catch it. Paul, can we, you're going to stay on, aren't you, Leonora? Hopefully. Yep.
I also have to jump to another presentation very, very sadly in 15 minutes, but I will hopefully at least be able to hear.
Thanks for your time. Paul, can I bring you in? Is that okay?
Great stuff. Thanks, Nigel.
You are good to see you as well, Paul.
And you, yeah, hiya. Great stuff.
So, Paul, you're a professor of geography, aren't you, at Leeds?
That's right.
University of Leeds.
Yeah, here at the university. So thanks for making time for us. That's really great. Lovely to be here. Thank you, and thanks for Leonora and Kate's wonderful talk. And I think they get a free pass from us all at Leeds for getting the train rather than flying. So I think we can excuse them for that. So it's wonderful to see that going in practice. So it's so easy to travel quickly, isn't it, as well? So well done for that. Wonderful. So shall I just crack on then, Nigel? Is that?
I think I'm not going to do any more introduction. I think you're going to take us through the session. Then we're going to have an interactive, aren't we? I think we're going to four breakout groups or something like that. Is that right?
Indeed. So I'll take you through what's going to happen in the next. We've got 40 minutes now, so thanks for that. And this is going to include me talking for about 10-15 minutes, and then we're going to have some breakout sessions. So we've got a team going in Leeds, which is really exciting. We've been really inspired by the Donut Economics Action Lab community. So we've been getting together under the umbrella of Climate Action Leeds, which is our really exciting £2.5 million National Lottery Climate Action Programme, which is current now. We'll be going for a year, and we're going to be around for the next 4 years. So one of my colleagues will certainly pop the website in the chat there so you can check out Climate Action Leeds. Part of that work, we're creating a city plan and planning process, which we're really excited about. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that before we start talking about the donut work. But it's a really exciting coalition across our Future Leeds, Voluntary Action Leeds, Together for Peace, Leeds Tidal, and CAG Consultants. Leeds Love It, Share It. We've just got a small grant from the University of Leeds to support some of this work. So we're really embedded in a community-led planning process to tackle climate action in Leeds, funded by the National Lottery. So one of the strands of our work is around how can we make this donut downscale a donut to Leeds. So the title of our little talk today is the Leeds from the Leeds Donut Coalition. So that's the name of our group. How can Leeds thrive and respect all people and planet? Okay, so we're going to have a look at this. So just by way of introductions, this is the session. I'm just going to say a little bit more about Climate Action Leeds and the coalition. I'm going to present some very draft initial findings from our Leeds Donut first snapshot. Yeah, these are very rough findings, but I thought you would appreciate that as a thinking tool, and I'm going to really put that into context. Then we're going to have some interactive breakouts, and then a roundup and next steps. So we will end at 12:25, Nigel, so we can wrap up this session promptly. So look, our work so far. So we've got this amazing a group of people at the moment, and you'll hear from many of them. We've got Kat on the call, we've got Jenny, we've got Anisha, we've got Irena, we've got Andy, we've got Joel, we've got Sam. So there's a whole cast of people out there who are developing this downscaling of the donut to the Leeds level. It's, as I said, it's part of our Climate Action Leeds National Lottery work. Engaging with 16 defined communities across Leeds at the moment, and we're really excited about how they can start to use this along with anybody else who wants to approach us. So look, we're an emerging group. We're just getting ourselves off the ground, so treat us in that kind of context. So this is our first almost public airing, yeah. But what we've got within Climate Action Leeds is we're trying to harvest the best lessons and understandings from a community-led process of climate action planning, right? In the context of the Council's Climate Emergency Declaration, right? How can we transform Leeds in the next 10 years to be relatively, zero carbon, and what we also call nature friendly because of the nature emergencies, but also socially just? How do we tackle those persistent social problems? So we want to create a new kind of planning process with the council in terms of how do we create collaboration, partnership, and some of the things that Kate and Leonora were talking about, right, in terms of the new way that Donut asks city planning to work. Okay, so Climate Action Leeds has got a number of elements. It's got some transition partners across different areas like food, energy, work. A big shout out to some of those on the call today. So you could maybe pop that in the chat across food, energy, that kind of thing, housing. We've got community hubs. Some of them might be here today. Certainly Otley 2030, we're working in communities. And Andy Goldring, we've got a city centre hub going. So one of the key things, we want to bring a lot of this together in the city centre, in a physical venue. So we're really keen to talk to you about that. So what we're after with the funded time period of Climate Action Leeds is to set the conditions for big changes across different sectors. Yeah, looking to the 2030s and the city's ambition. The really ambitious 3 pillars we've got. How do we get on the course for a zero carbon, nature friendly, socially just Leeds? That is our framing as Climate Action Leeds. Now we're going to be doing quite a bit of work between now and April the 28th when we're going to have a donut launch event. So you'll hear more about that. But our main aim is to connect, integrate, support and amplify work across Leeds. So the donut is not something different that will sit alongside everything. We want to integrate and support existing activities. Right, so now I'm going to go straight to, so the donut team, as you know, have got this 4 lens approach, right, which we've taken to do a very rough sketch of where Leeds is at. So as Kate and Leonora introduced, there's a wonderful kind of like 4 lens approach. Yeah. So the overarching question is, how can Leeds become the home of a thriving people in a thriving place? That's the natural world around us, while respecting the well-being of people outside Leeds, all over the world, and the health of the whole planet. So that gives us 4 questions to look at. Each one we can call a lens. Yeah. And as Kate mentioned, living inside the donut means not exceeding the ecological ceiling or falling below the social foundation. So here's the donut rolled out and the 4 questions, yeah? So how can the people of Leeds thrive? Yeah? And that's the local social lens. How can Leeds be as generous as the wildland next door? So that's what is the state of our local ecosystems in Leeds, yeah? Then more globally, how can Leeds respect the health of the whole planet? And that's our responsibility to the rest of the world, the world's ecosystems, right? Nature outside of Leeds, and our global responsibility. How can Leeds ensure the well-being of people all across the world? All the things that we depend upon life in Leeds. Now, very briefly, then, what I want to do is talk through with you some of the very draft results of our Leeds Donut Snapshot. So we've got a working group, and our aim between now and April is to flesh these out, yeah. And there's going to be a first donut report with some really excellent kind of animations and graphics, and we'll be presenting them at our April launch. And if you want to support us on that journey, definitely get in touch. But there is more work to be done, so these are just initial findings, yeah. So let's have a look. I'm going to go through them one by one, and different members of the team have led on this. So there's some really exciting work from some of our master's students and researchers at the University of Leeds, along with community practitioners who've really been bringing this stuff forward. So one of our key messages is we're setting up partnership working, which can yield really exciting insights into how we can shift Leeds in the way we all want to. Yeah, right. Lens number one is based around, as Kate outlined, there's the local social lens, right? Focuses on the 16 Sustainable Development Goals, which is a recognised United Nations framework, which is a useful framework to hang off some assessments. So what we do is we group them together into 4 different groupings, and it'd be interesting with Eve and her team to look at how these relate to the social progress index headings. Yeah, but we've grouped them in, and this is the way the donut methodology does it. It groups them into healthy, connected, empowered, and enabled. So we've got 16 targets. So we uncovered, and so Kat Rawthorne led on this one in a master's dissertation at University of Leeds. We uncovered 16 targets for the city under those different 16 headings, and then we found a snapshot related to each one to see it's an initial health check against those. So these are too small to see, by the way, that wasn't the point. Let's just zoom in on one of them, for example. The enabled one, this is more pertinent to today, stuff around jobs and income and education. So we pulled out some snapshots. What we know, therefore, is that the current economy in Leeds is performing well in some respects and less well in other respects, right? That's not a controversial thing to say. There's lots of challenges around wage levels, around precarious work, around universal credit claimants, around people in education and training, and around fuel poverty, right? So we know those challenges. The interesting thing is they're stubborn, they're long lasting, and they're widespread. And why aren't they going away? Right, and there's a broader conversation there to be had between the national and local politics, certainly. But that's the kind of frame we want to do. But the question for us is, does this represent life in the donut? Yeah. So what kind of economy do we have in Leeds, and to what extent is it representing that safe and just operating space? I mean, we certainly know that the Leeds economy has many strengths and many weaknesses. All too often, probably, the Leeds economy is a little bit of a leaky bucket, where those procurement contracts and wealth doesn't trickle down to communities, but trickles out of the city. We know it's large, hugely resource intensive. We know it has effects on people and planet and locally. And we know it generates a lot of jobs, but possibly precarious jobs, leading to a lot of in-work poverty. Yeah. So the question we want to put forward is, look, is this within the donut? It's very borderline. We want to come back to this one. Are we within the donut on the local social lens? That's one of the things we're going to be exploring. Yeah. Okay. The second one, the local ecological lens. So what's health of the local ecology, right? And Irena Bauman is leading this one with Andy Goldring. So we're really interested to connect with ecologists across the city and landscape architects and anyone interested in the health of our local ecosystems, right? So think about the different aspects of our ecosystems. We've got water, land, air, waste and matter, things that, things out there, the natural world. But the interesting thing about the natural world is that we are deeply interconnected with it and depend upon it, right, for our own well-being. So the logical conclusion is we need to look after it because it sustains our life. So what's the health of our local ecosystems? More work to be done, but we know that the water ecosystems, the land ecosystems and the air ecosystems in Leeds are relatively degraded and subject to pollution. Yeah, more work certainly to be done. We know nationally and internationally, we're talking about nature recovery, but only because we're facing elements of nature decline and nature collapse, right? Certainly in terms of non-human species of plants and animals, right? So that's a really important grounding challenge, right? Leeds is no really different. We are degrading and polluting our ecosystems, especially with a particular model of extended and overdevelopment, which is working its way through the planning system, right? So how do we start to protect and nurture our local ecosystems so they can sustain a thriving population? That's the real lock-in here, yeah? So again, is this within the donut? Are our local ecosystems, do they function in a way which is within the donut? That's a provocation which we want to explore with you, yeah? Okay, we're going to head globally now. Does Leeds respect planetary boundaries? Remember, Kate talked about those planetary boundaries. Think about a footprint metaphor. A lot of people talk about footprints. Leeds has got a physical footprint. It ends in Adlin, Otley, and it's got edges. Yeah. But what is the resource draw of the city? Right. what impact does it have on the rest of the world? So if you drew that footprint, it's much bigger than the physical footprint of Leeds. Now, what we know across carbon, especially through oceans and climate change, what we know in terms of phosphorus and nitrogen, things like fertilizer use, what we know about biodiversity and land use, is that nationally and globally we are exceeding planetary boundaries. Now, Joel Mould Hopkins we're working with here at the university, has done some downscaling of those national data sets. So what's the Leeds bit of that story? And what we know is that Leeds is no different to the national picture. So Leeds is exceeding by several factors many of these planetary boundaries because of the way life is undertaken in Leeds, right? The economy, the consumption habits, retail, all that kind of thing, the kinds of work we do. But look, it's not everybody. So Joel did some great work looking at income deciles, and we know that higher earners in Leeds bear the bigger brunt of that story than the lower earners, right? So there's an important social equality issue here, right? But one thing we are clearer on is that we are currently outside the donut here in terms of Leeds' impact on the rest of the world, the global health check, if you want, for a simpler way. And we know a lot of this is about the resource use and throughput of the city and how we depend on that resource basket and footprint across the world. Okay, there's a fourth lens. This is really exciting because rather than just thinking about kind of the ecosystem of the planet, we're thinking, what is the effect of Leeds and life in Leeds, economy, retail, all the things we do on other people across the world, be it a Bolivian tin miner or a Thai seamstress or a Russian coal miner, yeah? Who are all the people across the world that everyday life in Leeds depends on? So does Leeds respect people worldwide? Well, Joel did some really interesting figures for us. So if you take an internationally recognised issue like, for example, import child labour, what we can do is we can calculate Leeds' proportion of global child labour as a result of activities in Leeds using looking at consumption data. So how much of that problem do we import into Leeds as a result of the things we do in Leeds? So take the top left. The really interesting staggering figures, 21,000 person year equivalents of child labour are imported into Leeds because of what we do and how we consume and how we live in Leeds, yeah? And that is just actually staggering. You can go through different other aspects of imported accidents around the world, or global extraction of metals and the kind of dispossession of land that goes with that, or imported forced labour, yeah? So what is our local quota of those big global issues, yeah? So when we look around how life is in Leeds, what kind of economy we're developing, it has those global social consequences. Yeah. So the question we're asking is, is that within the donut? This is not quantified yet, but how much, to what extent are we within the donut in terms of our effect on people across the world? So look, those are just some glimpses of the kinds of things we're going to be looking at. But returning to Kate's provocation, can Leeds live within the donut? I mean, the reason we're doing this is absolutely we can. Yeah. So we haven't got a complete snapshot yet. And we are doing more work for April, so we will present a more complete picture then. But I just want to reinforce everything that's been said this morning from Tom and Eve and Councillor Pryor and everyone else, that we all know, and I've been involved in a lot of this, and we're really excited, and there's a whole universe of amazing people out there on this call that are doing donut style activities right here in Leeds. We're at the forefront of loads of amazing stuff across energy, housing, transport, water, flood defences, work, you name it, third sector stuff, asset-based development. I know there's a world of excellent donut type activities out there. The question is, how do we celebrate, supercharge that and lock it in to our development model? Because the emerging evidence does show aspects of Leeds are out of the safe and just operating space of the donut, right? So we have to think holistically about how we can get Leeds fully in the donut. So look, this is a call to all change makers. How do we get out of those silos? How do we collaborate, create partnerships and co-production? Some of our panel was saying. There's an opportunity to reflect on Leeds' way of life. I talk about Leeds' way of life because it's not just about the economy, it's about our broader livelihoods, all the things we depend on, right? Across retail, leisure, housing, you name it, yeah? Through the four lenses. What challenges do we need to act on? Have we got our challenge vision properly focused? What's working well and what should we keep? We really want to hear from you and harvest those great stuff in the breakout groups now. What trends and opportunities do we need to grasp? And what does the donut approach mean for this new best city ambition? We're really aware that the City Council are going through a live planning process in terms of restructuring its overall vision. That's a really exciting time. Yeah. So you know what kind of Leeds do you want in 2030? Yeah, that's what keeps me awake at night. Okay, so look, we've got the breakout rooms now. So what we're going to suggest is the following. According to your interest, and I think the team here, the technical team on Zoom, have got these rooms set up. So based on your interests, there's quite a lot of us on the call here. There's 68 of us. So you can choose a room, 1, 2, 3, or 4, according to the lens that really speaks to your interest or what you're working on, what you want to talk about. Yeah, we've got a Jamboard there. So if someone puts that Jamboard in the chat, you just click on that and go to it. So basically, there'll be a couple of us in each of those rooms, and then we will facilitate a conversation with you for 15 minutes, and we will come back in 15 minutes as clear instructions. What we want those breakout rooms to do is to inspire some conversations about what's working well in Leeds, what you're involved in, what donut style activity is already happening in that area, and how we can supercharge it. Yeah. I don't know if that leaves us with a little bit of time for commentary and chit chat on the chat. Before we do that, I'm aware that might take up quite a bit of time, so I'll take your advice on that, Nigel.
No, Paul, I think we need to move to the breakouts now, but we reserve 5 minutes to feedback at the end of it. So
let's do that. Yeah,
that'd be great. And if everybody could, when they come back out of the chat rooms, switch off your cameras and your mics again, and then we'll go back to you, Paul.
That's great. So we'll see you all in the breakout rooms. If you want to open those breakout rooms now, then, and you literally just select the one you want to, and then we're off. Yeah. Super. So are we seeing those? Breakout rooms open? Yeah, there we go. Off we go. Brilliant. Thank you very much. I'll pop to the local social now. So just click and join straight away. Yeah. Brilliant. Thanks, everyone.
Can't see them.
No, we can't see them, Paul. I can't. We can't. We've just got it. Choose which room you want to go to.
Have you got at the bottom of the page like a logo saying breakout rooms, maybe?
No, I think we've got something called Jamboard. That's all we've got. Is it in there?
There is 4 options at the bottom of it. It says breakout rooms, and if we press on it, it tells you which rooms to join.
Yeah, got it.
Next to the button for share screen.
Oh yeah, great.
Great stuff. So thank you very much for that as people return. Nigel, I think we've got everyone back now, yeah?
Yeah, that's great, Paul.
Yeah, great. And then just to finish off on, so listen, thank you for that. That was just a real a toe in the water, really, as for an extended discussion we want to have with you over the next coming months and years, to be honest. So where next for these discussions? Yeah. Certainly, we just provided a 15-minute glimpse and a discussion here today. Yeah. So where next, really? So we're pulling together these 4 snapshots, and we are launching on the 28th of April in our next Climate Action Leeds Assembly. So we will extend that invite to all of you here today, because we see those major events hosted by Climate Action Leeds as an opportunity for citywide networking on big issues. Yeah. So that'll be our launch on the 28th of April. So you're all invited. Watch this space. And we will have some kind of a membership offer launched then, so you can get involved in the steering groups and the working groups as you would like to. We want this to be a real open source partnership grouping, yeah, where we can tap into the genius across the city and learn from each other. We've got a 1 day a week post, which is the advert's live now. If someone could pop that in the chat as well, part of the Donut team, that'd be really exciting. We've only got 1 day a week resource from the National Lottery, but it still is 1 day a week. That's really exciting. So that'll start from April. So it's the advert's live now. If you know anyone who wants to apply, please share it with them. Equally looking for additional resources. So if anybody knows any opportunities to leverage any extra resources into our resource, please get in touch with me, because what we really want is a whole team of donut practitioners across the city. So if you know any resources, grants, opportunities to leverage in the extra resources we put on the table, please get in touch with me. So plans are going across the year. We want to do some testing at the community level, starting with Otley 2030. We're on this call. That's really exciting. They're doing some stuff around the Otley Donut. And then youth testing. We've got Angel House and Youth Strike, which is really exciting. We're doing some testing, and Councillor Prize mentioned stuff around intergenerational equity. And I think the key thing is here, what does this mean for our young people in the city, right? Because if anything, it's an intergenerational issue now, right? In terms of what is the legacy of the city we're leaving now and building in 10, 20 years' time. And we're showcasing all this in the city centre hub post-COVID, boo for COVID. So when we all get back on our feet and out and about, Andy Goldring's leading this, who's on the call. But can you help us find a venue in the city centre? We're going to have a showcase kind of city centre climate action hub, where it's going to be a home for the donut. So if you know an opportunity, get in touch. Okay, here's the team, lots of us, which is great and exciting. You know, we're all working on different areas. You've seen some of us today, certainly in the breakout rooms, just dipping our toe in the water of the things we want to discuss with you. So that's really, really exciting. So that's it, really. That ends on, you know, what could our vision for Leeds be? I think that's as Leeds City Council consults on its best city plan. It's a question we're all taking with us through our lives. Yeah. Where does Leeds need to be in the 2030s? You know, what do we want our vision to be? And certainly the donut lays down those provocations about a city that is much more regenerative, much more circular, which has a strong emphasis on thriving livelihoods and is distributive. Yeah? Through those really powerful activity areas of what is our purpose, what networks are we building, governance, who owns what, and the financial mechanism. Yeah. So those are our provocations. That is our contribution. So thank you very much for that, Nigel. I'll stop sharing there. And yeah, that's the end of our bit. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks to the team as well. That was a real canter through. But I think we, as you say, we're dipping our toe in the water. We're nearly time to wrap up. So Paul's offered the opportunity for everyone to be engaged. I think that came across very, very strongly, both from Kate and Leonora. It came across earlier about this importance that we start now, because you said the 2030s, and we've got a net zero target in Leeds of 2030. So you said now in the 2020s, we need to get started. This is a direct impact on much wider than net zero as well. All of the aspirations of our inclusive growth strategy. I'd like to say, before I try to sum up what was an amazing discussion, I'd really like to say thank you to all of the team. at the all of the inclusive growth team. I mean, they put on a fantastic session today. I was a bit skeptical about the breakouts, but they did work in the end, but we probably didn't leave ourselves enough time. But the team's done a fantastic job bringing together a whole range of speakers and panelists. And I just echo what was in the chat again. It was an inspirational session, and it really started off with a lot of high energy and thoughtfulness from Tom and Eve, and then it just continued all the way through. So thanks to Fiona and the team. Eve has mentioned already the social progress index. That's quite an important part of the evidence to understand what's going on and to show how it's distributed across the city. And across the different factors that or indicators that we're measuring. So I think that's a really important area of development. We'll come back to that later in the year. I'd also like to say thank you to all of our panelists and speakers. They've been great, and they've all maintained that high level of energy and aspiration and hope, which I think we all sometimes need. With the challenges that we're facing. So I actually came out of today's session really inspired. But I think there were a few common themes that came out as well. Not only was it a very positive and ambitious session, but it was also a real strength of partnership, both from people on the call, but the desire to work together, because I think we can't tackle these very complex issues without working in partnership. So the term we use about the inclusive growth delivery partnership, it does need everybody in the city. Everyone's got a role to play, both the people on the call, but much more widely. So how we engage, and the work that Eve and the team are doing with the anchors is about setting a model that doesn't stop with the anchors. It's about how we spread that out more widely, across the city. I think there are some big challenges we've highlighted. Tom and Eve highlighted those. I think Paul's set them out very clearly there, and the panel really had a very strong view about how we tackle some of these really difficult challenges around cost of living and around workforce and around diversity and fairness. And I think we in Leeds have got a real opportunity to be a leader, as Kate said. Why shouldn't we be like Amsterdam in the way we approach things? Why shouldn't we be, a city that shows the rest of the world, the rest of the UK, how you can tackle these sorts of issues, but you don't need to leave people and communities behind. Because I think for me, inclusive doesn't mean most people; it means everyone in our city. And I think that is certainly the vision of the team. Certainly the vision of the council and the councillors, and I think it's a big challenge. But I think we've got the wherewithal, the ability, and the talent to actually make that leap. I just want to hand over to you, Eve, just to see if there's anything else that you want to add just before we sign off.
Just really quickly, because I know we're at 12:30, just to say thank you for all of your support for the work that we do, and the kind of direction, the policy work we've been doing, the review, the future talent plan. I know you're all active contributors and supporters, and we really appreciate it. And also to say that the next one of these events, we're really intending to be face-to-face, because we haven't been able to have a face-to-face one for a long time. And so we will issue the dates around that when we share a kind of summary of the event. And I would also ask you to share the recording of this event with one other person. So don't just put it on social media, contact someone who you know will be interested in the content and send them the link. And encourage them to dive in if there was someone that didn't come, because the whole thing about our inclusive growth delivery partnership is that it's open and inclusive, and that anyone can come along to any of these sessions. So we'd love to have even more people involved and aware of all the work that we're doing. And thank you to you, Nigel, as well for your support, which you give to us outside of these meetings, but also through sort of chairing today. So thank you.
Oh, thanks, Eva. I appreciate that. We have got a number of ambassadors. They're all very active. We've spoken about some of them on the call. You can get engaged with our ambassadors as well, because they're big supporters of the city. And I think we really want to make that change. And I think I echo what Eve's saying. we'll publish the actions that are arising out of the discussion. We'll also share with everyone the events that are coming up in 2022, and we want to see you face to face so we can really start to accelerate the change as we come out of the pandemic, to make sure we address some of these deep-seated issues. So thank you, everyone. And we'll see you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.